For 600 years, the Vreth Dominion had never lost a war. Not once. They had conquered 47 star systems. They had broken civilizations that believed themselves unbreakable. They had reduced planets to silence and called it diplomacy. Their fleet numbered in the thousands, their soldiers in the billions, their confidence absolute. And for 600 years, no one had given them a reason to doubt themselves. Then, in the 342nd year of their expansion, the Vreth Dominion made a decision. A small one, a quiet one. They attacked a human colony. It was supposed to be a demonstration, a warning, a message sent to a civilization that had been growing too fast, expanding too quietly, watching too carefully. It was supposed to be over in hours. Instead, it became the last mistake the Vreth Dominion ever made. The Vreth were not cruel by nature, they were practical. In their 6 centuries of expansion, they had developed a system. When a new civilization appeared on their borders, the Dominion would send a diplomatic delegation. The delegation would explain politely that the universe operated according to certain rules, that larger powers had certain rights, that smaller powers had certain obligations. Most civilizations understood. Those that did not understand received a demonstration. And demonstrations always worked, every single time. Supreme Commander Vael-Korr stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominion and watched the human colony of New Carthage grow larger on the tactical display. It was a modest settlement, 400,000 humans, industrial infrastructure, mining operations, a small defensive fleet, 12 patrol ships, 3 orbital platforms, and a handful of ground-based defense systems that Vael-Korr's analysts had already categorized as inadequate. He had brought 600 warships. Not because he needed 600 warships to destroy New Carthage. He brought 600 warships because he wanted humanity to see 600 warships. He wanted every human eye watching every sensor and every telescope pointed at this system to understand in absolute clarity what the Vreth Dominion represented. He wanted them afraid. Open a channel, Vael-Korr ordered. The communication officer complied. A moment later, a human face appeared on the screen. A man, gray hair, tired eyes, the rank insignia of a colonial governor. "I am Governor Daniel Marsh of New Carthage Colony," the man said. His voice was steady. Vael-Korr noted this with mild approval. Composure, at least, was a quality worth respecting. "Governor," Vael-Korr kept his tone formal, professional, "you are looking at 600 warships of the Vreth Dominion. I want you to understand that this display of force is not an act of aggression. It is an invitation." The governor said nothing, he waited. "The Vreth Dominion is prepared to offer humanity a place within our administrative structure," Vael-Korr continued. "Your colonies would retain their governance. Your people would retain their customs. In exchange, you would acknowledge Dominion authority over external affairs, defense, and resource allocation." Still, the governor said nothing. "You have 4 hours to consider our offer," Vael-Korr said. "After 4 hours, we will proceed to demonstrate what rejection looks like." Governor Marsh was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "I need to make a call first," the governor said. Vael-Korr allowed himself a small smile. "Of course." The channel closed. Vael-Korr turned to his tactical officer. "They will comply, they always comply." His tactical officer nodded. "The colony has sent a transmission, long-range, encrypted." "To Earth, presumably," Vael-Korr waved a hand. "Let them call home, it changes nothing." He was wrong. 4 hours passed. Governor Marsh reappeared on the screen. He looked the same as before, steady, tired, calm. "The Supreme Commander," the governor said, "I've spoken with Earth." And Vael-Korr asked. They said to tell you something. Governor Marsh paused. They said we know. Vael-Korr frowned. Know what? But the channel had already closed. For 3 seconds, the bridge of the Eternal Dominion was completely silent. Then the tactical display exploded with alerts. Multiple contacts, the sensor officer shouted. Bearing 074 range, he stopped. That can't be right. Report, Vael-Korr said sharply. Contacts are appearing inside our formation, sir. The sensor officer's voice had gone flat, shocked into monotone. They're not coming from outside the perimeter, they're appearing inside it. Vael-Korr looked at the display. Red contacts were blooming across his fleet like sparks, not approaching, materializing. Weapons free, he ordered. All ships weapons free. The Dominion fleet opened fire. They hit each other. In the chaos of contacts appearing inside their own formation, 3 Dominion warships destroyed each other before their targeting S. Customs recalibrated. By the time the fleet stopped firing, 17 ships were damaged. And then, as quickly as they had appeared, the contacts vanished. Silence. What was that? Vael-Korr demanded. No one answered because no one knew. Damage report, Vael-Korr said quietly. 17 ships damaged, 4 critically, no hostile contacts remaining. The tactical officer hesitated. Sir, the contacts that appeared inside our formation, they weren't ships. Then what were they? Drones, small, fast, they weren't armed. Another pause, they were transmitting. Transmitting what? The communications officer pulled up the signal. Coordinates, sir. They were broadcasting our fleet coordinates, our exact positions on a wideband frequency. To whom? No one answered that either. Vael-Korr stared at the tactical display. His fleet was intact. The colony was still there. Nothing had actually happened except his ships had fired on each other and he now had a growing headache. Prepare the bombardment, he said. If they want to play games, we end this now. Sir, the weapons officer looked up. Our targeting systems are experiencing interference. I'll fix it. Sir, the interference is coming from the colony itself. They're broadcasting on 17 frequencies simultaneously. It's overloading our acquisition systems. Vael-Korr's headache intensified. He looked at the colony of New Carthage on the main screen. 400,000 people, 12 patrol ships, 3 orbital platforms. They were jamming a 600-ship fleet. Manual targeting, Vael-Korr ordered. Override the automated systems, fire on my command. It took 12 minutes to reconfigure. 12 minutes during which the colony kept broadcasting and his fleet kept sitting there, 600 warships unable to fire because a colonial governor was flooding his targeting systems with noise. Finally, the weapons officer looked up. Manual targeting confirmed, ready to fire. Fire, Vael-Korr said. The Eternal Dominion's main batteries opened up, and the orbital platforms absorbed the first salvo completely. Vael-Korr stared. The platforms should have vaporized. The energy output of his main batteries could crack a moon. Damage assessment, he said carefully. The platforms appear to be constructed from, the tactical officer read the sensor report twice. From compressed neutron star material, sir, the outer layer at least. A compressed neutron star material. A colonial government had built orbital platforms out of compressed neutron star material. Continue firing, Vael-Korr said. His voice was very quiet now. They fired for 40 minutes. By the end, all 3 platforms were destroyed. They had used 11% of the fleet's total ammunition reserves to destroy 3 orbital platforms above a colony that was supposed to be a demonstration. Governor Marsh's face appeared on the screen again. "We've sent our report to Earth," the governor said. His voice was still steady, still calm. "They wanted a complete record of your capabilities." Vael-Korr understood suddenly why the drones had been broadcasting their positions, and why the colony had jammed his targeting, and why the platforms had been built from neutron star material. None of it had been defense. All of it had been data collection. He had just spent 40 minutes showing humanity exactly what his fleet could do. "Destroy the colony," Vael-Korr said. And they did. New Carthage burned. 400,000 humans gone. Vael-Korr watched it happen and told himself it was necessary. Told himself that humanity needed to understand the cost of resistance. He filed his report. He described the jamming systems, the neutron material platforms, the drone swarms. He recommended a cautious approach to any further contact with humanity. His superiors overruled him. "One colony," the Dominion Council said. "They lost one colony. They will negotiate now." Vael-Korr was not so certain. He thought about what the governor had said. "They said, we know." He had assumed it meant nothing. A bluff. A last gesture of defiance from a man who understood his colony was about to die. But what if it had meant something else? What if "we know" didn't mean "we know you're coming"? What if it meant we know exactly who you are, what you have, and what we need to do about it? He kept that thought to himself. 3 months later, he wished he had spoken louder. Deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that did not officially exist, a woman named Admiral Sierra Vance stood in front of the largest tactical display she had ever seen. The display showed the known galaxy. Most of it was gray, neutral, unknowns. A small section near the center glowed red, Vreth Dominion space, 600 years of expansion, 47 conquered systems. A small section near the edge glowed blue, human space, 42 colonized systems, 300 years of quiet, careful growth. Between the red and the blue, a single colony marker blinked yellow. New Carthage no longer inhabited. Sierra stared at the yellow marker for a long moment. Then she looked at the man standing beside her. Jonathan Cross was 71 years old. He had white hair and the kind of stillness that came from decades of absolute certainty. He had spent the last 40 years building something that most of humanity didn't know existed. "It happened exactly as projected," Cross said. 400,000 people, Sierra replied. Yes, he didn't look away from the display. "We knew they would test us. We knew they would choose a border colony. We knew they would expect us to negotiate. We could have defended New Carthage." "No, we couldn't have." Cross finally turned to look at her. "Not without revealing what we have. And what we have is the only thing that saves the other 41 colonies." Sierra had known this intellectually for years. She had understood the logic. She had agreed with the strategy. It was different watching a yellow marker blink where a colony used to be. "How long?" she asked. "They'll be here within 6 months, the full Dominion fleet." Cross turned back to the display. "Every ship they have, every soldier, they'll want to end this before it begins." "And when they arrive?" Cross smiled. It was a quiet smile. The smile of a man who had been waiting 40 years for a specific moment. "Then they find out what we've been building," he said. 40 years earlier, humanity had made a decision. It had not been a public decision. There had been no votes, no speeches, no announcements. A small group of people, analysts, scientists, military strategists, intelligence officers, had looked at the data coming in from deep space and reached a conclusion. Humanity was not alone. And the civilizations that surrounded human space were, almost without exception, organized around a single principle: the strong consume the weak. There was no galactic council of peace, no federation of equals, no benevolent alliance waiting to welcome a new species. There was expansion and there was submission, there was conquest and there was survival. Well, humanity had a choice. They could grow normally, colonize systems, build fleets, develop technology, and hope that by the time a larger power noticed them, they would be strong enough to negotiate from a position of strength. Or they could do something else. The group chose something else. The official human military budget, the ships, the soldiers, the weapons that any external observer could identify and count and analyze, that was real. It was also, as of 40 years ago, approximately 20% of humanity's actual military capability. The other 80% was hidden. Not hidden in plain sight, not obscured by classification systems that could be hacked or analysts that could be bribed. Hidden in the genuine darkness of unexplored space. 312 shipyards, built in uninhabited systems so far from human territory that no Dominion scout had ever found them. 11,000 warships, crewed and ready, sitting silent in the dark. Weapons systems that had never been tested in combat because humanity had been waiting, specifically, deliberately waiting for the right moment. And beneath Earth itself, the project that made all of it possible. Project Vanguard. The facility was 7 kilometers underground. It had taken 30 years to build and a decade to bring online. Its purpose was simple, in the way that the most revolutionary things are always simple in concept and staggering in execution. It was a gate network. Humanity had cracked instantaneous transit. Not faster than light travel, not compressed space tunnels that still required hours of traversal. Instantaneous, here to there in zero time. Across any distance. The network had 48 primary nodes, each one capable of opening a gate to any other node in the system. The nodes were placed in those 312 hidden shipyards. They were placed near the Dominion's most critical infrastructure. They were placed, with extraordinary care, in positions that had taken 40 years of careful preparation to secure. When the Vreth Dominion arrived at Earth with their entire fleet, they would be sailing into a trap 40 years in the making. They just didn't know it yet. The Dominion fleet arrived 6 months later. It was the largest military force the Vreth had ever assembled. 2,400 warships, 30 million soldiers, every resource the Dominion could pull from its 47 systems. Supreme Commander Vael-Korr had argued against this. He had said they were overextending, that pulling every ship to one theater was reckless. The Council had not listened. They wanted this finished, cleanly, completely. They wanted humanity broken, occupied, and producing resources for the Dominion within a year. Vael-Korr stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and watched the human homeworld fill the tactic. I'll display. Earth, a blue-green planet, 1 moon, a modest defensive fleet visible on sensors, perhaps 300 ships clustered near the planet's orbital stations. 300 ships against 2,400. Even Vael-Korr, despite his unease, could see no scenario in which this ended poorly for the Dominion. Open a channel to Earth, he ordered. The channel opened. A woman appeared on the screen. She wore the uniform of a human admiral, dark hair, dark eyes, and an expression that Vael-Korr had seen exactly once before in his career. It was the expression Governor Marsh had worn. The calm's tired waitings. Admiral, he said, you are looking at 2,400 warships. I am going to offer you the same choice I offered New Carthage. No, the Admiral said. Vael-Korr paused. No. We're not interested in your offer. She looked directly at him. We're also not interested in a long conversation, so I'll keep this short. She held up one finger. 40 years ago, we saw you coming. A second finger. We spent those 40 years getting ready. A third finger. You destroyed New Carthage, 400,000 people. Her voice didn't change, didn't shake, didn't harden. It simply stated a fact the way a doctor states a diagnosis. We've spent 6 months deciding what a proportionate response looks like. She lowered her hand. We decided it looks like this. She cut the channel. For exactly 4 seconds, nothing happened. Then space itself opened up. Not at the edges of the system, not approaching from a distance. It opened everywhere. 48 tiers in the fabric of space, ripping apart simultaneously across the entire battlefield. Blue-white light poured through them, and through that light came ships. Not 300 ships. Not 1,000 ships. 11,240 warships materialized around the Dominion fleet in less than 30 seconds. Vael-Korr stared at his tactical display and could not for a moment understand what he was seeing. The numbers didn't make sense. Humanity had 42 colonies. Humanity had a visible fleet of 300 ships. Humanity did not have 11,000 warships. Sir, his tactical officer's voice was very quiet. We're surrounded. I can see that, Vael-Korr said. The contacts didn't transit through hyperspace. The officer stopped. They appeared instantaneously from nowhere. From gates, Vael-Korr said, he had suspected. He had suspected for 6 months, ever since the report about Project Vanguard had crossed his desk. A single intercepted fragment of a human communication that mentioned the project name and nothing else. He had told the Council. The Council had said it was impossible. All ships combat formation, he began. But he was already too late. The human fleet didn't hesitate, didn't demand surrender, didn't give a speech. They opened fires. What followed lasted 11 hours. The Dominion fleet was large, well-trained, experienced. In any conventional engagement against any opponent they had ever faced, they would have won. This was not a conventional engagement. Every time a section of the Dominion fleet pushed against the human lines, fresh ships appeared through the gates behind them. Every time Dominion forces found a gap, it closed. Every time a human warship was destroyed, it was replaced within minutes. The Dominion ships had nowhere to run. The gates had positioned the human fleet in a sphere around them, above, below, in every direction. And slowly, relentlessly, the Dominion fleet began to shrink. Vael-Korr watched his tactical display change from red to nothing. Ships destroyed, ships disabled, ships that had stopped responding to communications. At hour 7, he attempted to break through the human perimeter with 400 ships in a concentrated wedge formation. Humanity let the wedge form, let the ships accelerate, let them build momentum. Then they opened a gate directly in the path of the formation, and 300 fresh warships appeared 10 kilometers ahead of the Dominion advance. The wedge shattered. At hour 9, Vael-Korr sent a surrender request. The human admiral's face appeared on his screen. I accept your surrender, she said, with one condition. I'll name it. Every record of New Carthage, every sensor log, every tactical report, every communication your fleet recorded during the attack, you give it to us. Vael-Korr frowned. Why? Because 400,000 people died there, the admiral said, and we want their names said by the people who killed them. Vael-Korr transferred the files. The Vreth Dominion Council received the news of their fleet's surrender 14 hours after it happened. For the first time in 600 years, the council chamber went completely silent. Not the silence of grief, not the silence of shock. The silence of absolute incomprehension. 2,400 warships, 30 million soldiers, the entire military street. NGTH of the Vreth Dominion. Gone. 112 ships had escaped through the edges of the battle before the human fleet could close the net. 112 ships out of 2,400. The first counselor, an old Vreth named Sevan, read the report 3 times. Then he called the intelligence director. "How did we not know about the gates?" he asked. "We didn't know to look," the director said. "There were no energy signatures, no construction records, no communications about the project, nothing." 40 years, Sevan said. "Oh yes. They built this for 40 years and we didn't know." "I know." Sevan was quiet for a long time. "What else don't we know?" The intelligence director didn't answer, because the answer was everything. They knew nothing about humanity. They had assumed they knew 42 colonies, a modest fleet, a civilization young enough to be manageable. Every assumption had been wrong. The 42 colonies were real. The visible fleet had been real. But behind that, in the dark, humanity had been preparing for precisely this moment. 40 years of preparation. 40 years of building a military capability that dwarfed anything the Dominion had assembled in 6 centuries of expansion. And they had built it for one reason. Because they had seen the Dominion coming. "What do they want?" the first counselor asked. The intelligence director had been briefed on the human admiral's final transmission. He read it now. She said, "We don't want your systems, we don't want your planets, we don't want to occupy your space or rule your people." Sevan blinked, "Then what do they want?" She said, "We want you to leave us alone, permanently, irrevocably, with consequences you will never forget attached to any future violation." A pause. "And New Carthage?" Sevan asked. The intelligence director read the final line of the transmission. She said, "New Carthage cannot be returned to us, but the Vreth star system of Karathvel, the administrative center of your expansion operations, the world from which the order to destroy New Carthage was given, can be returned to what it was before your species touched it." Sevan went very still. Karathvel, the system that had administrated the Dominion's expansion for 4 centuries. 7 billion Vreth, the center of everything. "Oh, she wouldn't," he said. "She already has," the intelligence director said quietly. And he showed the counselor the sensor data. Karathvel was gone. Not bombed, not occupied. Gone. The human fleet had opened a gate to the system's star and done something to it that the Dominion's scientists were still trying to understand. The star had simply stopped, and then the shockwave had followed. 7 billion Vreth. Gone. Sevan sat in absolute silence for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "An entire star system," he said. "Oh yes. In response to one colony." 400,000 people, the intelligence director said quietly. That was their calculation, 400,000 humans for 7 billion Vreth. They considered it disproportionate. He paused. They sent a note explaining that. The admiral said they debated the proportionate response for 6 months and ultimately concluded that proportionality in this case was less important than clarity. "A clarity," Sevan repeated. She said, "We want you to be absolutely clear for the rest of your civilization's existence about what happens when you touch what is ours." Sevon looked at the empty space on the tactical display where Carathvel used to be. He was clear. The human admiral's transmission went out across every communication frequency in known space 3 days later. Every civilization received it. Every government, every military command, every intelligence agency that was listening. It was short, less than 2 minutes. My name is Admiral Sierra Vance of the Unified Human Defense Command. 6 months ago, the Vreth Dominion destroyed New Carthage colony, 400,000 human beings, men, women, children, a community that had existed for 60 years, gone. We did not respond immediately, not because we were afraid, not because we were unprepared. We responded when we chose to respond. The Vreth Dominion no longer has a fleet. They no longer have the administrative infrastructure from which they chose to attack us. What remains of their civilization will require centuries to rebuild, if it rebuilds at all. We want to be clear about some things. We are not conquerors. We do not want your systems, your resources, or your submission. Every civilization in this galaxy is free to exist however it chooses, expand wherever it chooses, govern itself however it sees fit. There is one exception. Humanities. We are not a target, we are not a stepping stone. We are not a demonstration, we are not a lesson. New Carthage taught us something we already knew but now know in our bones. The only language. Ye that certain powers understand is consequence. So let this be the consequence that is remembered. We did not build our fleet to conquer. We built it because we knew 40 years ago that this day would come. We spent 40 years preparing not to win a war. We spent 40 years preparing to make sure no war ever had to be fought again. Pause. Touch what is ours. See what remains of you. The transmission ended. In the weeks that followed, 3 civilizations that had been considering expansion into human border space quietly redirected their growth vectors. 2 others that had been watching the Dominion situation with opportunistic interest suddenly found reasons to open diplomatic channels with Earth. And in the ruins of what had been Vreth Dominion space, the remaining ships of the most powerful empire the galaxy had seen in 6 centuries drifted in silence. Supreme Commander Vael-Korr, aboard one of the 112 ships that had escaped, read the Admiral's transmission 7 times. He thought about Governor Marsh, about the steady voice, about the tired eyes, about the absolute calm of a man who had known exactly what he was doing even as his colony burned. He had said, they said to tell you something. They said, we know. Vael-Korr finally understood what that meant. It hadn't been a bluff. It hadn't been defiance. It had been a statement of fact from a civilization that had spent 40 years understanding everything the Dominion was, everything it could do, and exactly what it would take to end it. They had known. They had always known. And they had waited patiently for the Dominion to give them a reason. 400,000 people had given them that reason. 1 star system had been the answer. Vael-Korr sat in his command chair in the silence of a ship that no longer had a fleet, a homeworld, or an empire to return to. And he thought, somewhere in a facility 7 kilometers beneath the surface of Earth, a woman named Admiral Sierra Vance was already looking at the next problem. Already preparing. Already waiting. The galaxy, he understood now, had been lucky. Humanity had chosen patience. They could have chosen otherwise at any moment in the last 40 years. They had not. They had waited for a reason. Next time, if there was a next time, Vael-Korr hoped, desperately, that no one gave them one.